Welcome back to the show. If you're new here, welcome. And if you've been riding along with me for a while, thank you so much for coming back. This journey we're on together, it's not just about motivation, and it's not just about success. It's about learning how to think differently about your life. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to hit a certain level in life, and then they just kind of stay there? Not because they're lazy, and not because they don't have the talent, but almost like they've reached a certain level and it's invisible, a ceiling they can't quite break through. And the wild thing, most people don't even realize that ceiling exists. They think it's just part of the job, or their circumstances, their opportunities, or maybe even their luck. But today, we're going to talk about something much deeper, something I call the identity ceiling. Because in life, people rarely rise above the identity that they've accepted for themselves. Think about that for a moment. Not the identity you wish you had, not the identity other people see you in, but the identity you quietly carry around in your own mind. The one that says, this is about as far as I go for somebody like myself. And once that belief settles in, it becomes a ceiling, an invisible one at that. But it's a powerful one. So today, we're going to unpack where the ceiling comes from, and then why so many people live under it for years, sometimes their entire lives. And then we're going to talk about how to recognize that moment, and then what you can start doing to break through it. Because the truth is this, the life you're capable of living might be sitting just above the identity you've accepted. And once you see that, you can never unsee it. So let's talk about it. Are you ready? I am. I'm Jonah. I'm your person. Let's get to it. All right, let's start here. We're going to talk about the invisible limit. So I want to ask you something. Have you ever noticed how two people can have the same exact opportunity, the same resources, the same starting point, and one of them takes off, whilst the other one stays exactly where they are? Now, most people will say the difference is talent, or intelligence, or luck. But after studying people for so long, watching leaders, watching entrepreneurs, watching people who completely reinvent their lives, I've noticed something else, something far more subtle. Most people don't stop because they can't go higher. They stop because they've reached the highest version of themselves they currently believe they are allowed to be. Think about that for a second. Because that belief, that quiet internal identity, creates something I call the identity ceiling. And the wild thing about ceilings is most of the time, you don't even realize it's there. You just start adjusting your life to fit underneath it. Maybe it shows up like this. You don't apply for the opportunity because people like you just don't do that. Or you don't speak up in the room because that's not really who you are. Or you don't pursue the bigger version of your life because somewhere along the way, you accepted a smaller identity. And once that identity locks in, your decisions start protecting it. Your behavior starts reinforcing it. Your life begins orbiting around it. This is why two people with the same talent can end up in completely different places. One of them is living under a ceiling they never questioned, and the other one decided to raise it. And here's the most powerful part of all of this. Your identity ceiling isn't built from concrete. It's built from belief, which means something incredible. It can be lifted. It can be expanded. And sometimes it can disappear entirely. But first, you have to see it. And then the next part, we're going to talk about something that might surprise you. Because a lot of the ceilings we live under were never even created by us in the first place. They were handed to us. Let's talk about that next. Let's build on something we just talked about. Because a lot of people hear the phrase identity ceiling, and they immediately think, okay, so I just need to believe in myself more. But the truth is a little bit more complicated than that. Most of us didn't consciously choose the identity we're living under. We inherited it. Think about when we were growing up. Somewhere along the way, people started telling you who you were. Maybe directly, maybe subtly, maybe even without even realizing it. Oh, you're the quiet one. You're not the athletic one. You're the smart one. Or you're not the smart one. Or you've heard phrases even in jest. Oh, you're not the sharpest tool in the tool shed. You're not the leader. Oh, you're the shy one. Oh, you're the one who plays it safe. And when you hear that, and you hear it enough times, especially when you're young, it stops sounding like someone's opinion and it starts sounding like the truth. And once something like that becomes truth in your mind, you begin organizing your life around it. You don't try out for the thing. You don't pursue the role. You don't step into the opportunity. And it's not because you can't, but because somewhere deep down, your brain says, that's not who you are. And here's the wild part. Many people are still living inside an identity that was formed when they were 12 years old, or 16 years old, or during some random moment when someone made a comment that stuck. And now, here you are, a full-grown adult, still carrying around a label that was handed to you decades ago. A label that may have never been true in the first place. This is where higher level thinking starts to change everything. Because the moment you realize an identity was assigned to you, you also realize something powerful. It can be reassigned. You can question it. You can expand on it. You can completely rewrite it. But first, you have to notice where those old identities still quietly run your life. And in the next part, we're going to talk about the moment everything changes. Because breaking the identity ceiling doesn't start with success. It starts with something much earlier than that. It starts with a decision. All right, let's talk about something that I call the comfort cage. Let me ask you something. Have you ever noticed how the life you have right now slowly becomes the life you defend? Even if parts of it frustrate you, or even when you know you're capable of more. Think about that. Because this is where the identity ceiling gets really sneaky. It doesn't trap you with failure. It traps you with familiarity. You get used to the job, used to the schedule, or used to the version of yourself people expect. And before you know it, you start protecting the very life you once wanted to change. Not because you love it, but because it's predictable. Your brain loves predictability, and predictability means safe. But predictable can also mean stuck. And this happens to people who are incredibly capable, smart people, talented people. People who, if they were being honest with themselves, would admit something quietly. I think I'm meant for more than this. But here's the catch. The moment you start pushing beyond your identity ceiling, something strange happens. Your brain starts whispering things like, who do you think you are? People like you don't usually do that. Let's not get carried away. Sound familiar? That voice isn't reality. That voice is your comfort cage trying to stay locked. Because once you start expanding who you believe you are, the old version of you doesn't get to run the show anymore. And that's uncomfortable. But here's the truth. Every person you admire, every person who built something meaningful, every person who changed their life in a big way, at some point, they had to step outside of the version of themselves that felt safe. They had to outgrow their comfort cage. And once the door cracks open, something powerful begins to happen. Because you start realizing something most people never notice. Your ceiling. And your ceiling was never fixed in the first place. And that realization leads us to something even deeper. Because if the ceiling isn't real, then we have to ask a bigger question. Who actually installed it? Let's talk about that next. All right, let's dig into the question of who installed that ceiling. Because if your identity ceiling isn't real, then someone had to teach it to you. Think about that. Most people assume the limits in their life came from their abilities, or the lack thereof. But that's rarely true. Most ceilings come from messages, messages you heard growing up, messages you picked up from teachers or friends or parents or coworkers, even society itself. Little comments, little moments, and little labels. And over time, those labels slowly start to shape how you see yourself. Maybe once someone said, "You're not really the leadership type," or "You should probably play it safe." Or maybe the message wasn't spoken at all. Maybe it was implied. Maybe you grew up watching people struggle financially, and somewhere in your mind, a quiet belief formed. People like us don't really get ahead. And those messages are extremely powerful, not because they're true, but because they stick. And once they stick, something interesting happens. You start living your life inside of the boundaries of that belief, not realizing you're doing it. You make decisions that match the story. You avoid risks that challenge the story. You shrink opportunities that threaten that story. And all while thinking you're just being realistic. But here's the truth. Most identity ceilings weren't built by reality. They were built by old information. Information that may have been incomplete or misguided or simply just outdated. And the moment you realize that, something shifts. Because if those limits were learned, they can also be unlearned. And when that happens, when someone begins rewriting the story they've been living inside, their life can change faster than they ever expected. Which brings us to the moment where things start to move. Because once you see the ceiling, you have a choice. You can keep living under it, or you can start pushing against it. And that's where things get interesting. Before we move on, here's a quick challenge. I want you to identify one area of your life where you've quietly decided that's probably not for someone like me. Maybe it's leadership. Maybe it's starting something new. Or maybe it's speaking up more. Now, write that thing down. And underneath it, write the sentence, "The only thing stopping me is the identity I've accepted." Just seeing it on paper will tell you something powerful. Because once you can see the ceiling, you can start raising it. All right, now it's time to level up with the identity upgrade. Here's where things start to shift. Because once you realize there is an identity ceiling, the next question becomes obvious. Can you raise it? And the answer is yes. But not in the way most people think. Most people believe identity changes come after success. They think, once I get the promotion, then I'll be a leader. Once I get in shape, then I'll feel confident. Once people respect me, then I'll believe in myself. But that's backwards. Success almost never changes identity. Identity creates success. Think about the people you know who seem to operate at a higher level. The ones who walk into a room and just feel grounded or calm or certain. It's not arrogance, it's alignment. They've already decided they are. And here's the part most people miss. Identity isn't something you magically discover one day. It's something you practice daily, in small ways. The way you speak to people, the way you carry yourself, the way you show up when things are difficult. Every one of those moments is a vote for the identity you're building. This is why two people can have the same opportunity, the same education, or the same resources and still end up living completely different lives. Because one person is operating from the identity of someone who says, "I'm capable of more," and the other is still living inside a ceiling they didn't even realize they inherited. So the real shift isn't waiting for life to prove you're ready. The real shift is deciding who you're becoming and starting to practice that identity today. But this raises another powerful question. If identity is something you can practice, then what's one small shift, one mental move that can start raising your calling immediately? And then you can burst that through that ceiling because you made a conscious decision. And most people have never even considered it. Let's talk about that next. All right, let's talk about the identity rewrite. This is where things get very practical because we're not just talking about identity anymore. We're talking about how to actually start raising the ceiling in real time or just bust right through it. Most people think they need a huge breakthrough moment to shift who they are. But the truth is, identity doesn't usually change in big explosions. It changes in small rewrites, or micro moments, or tiny decisions, or what I like to call baby steps. And there's one shift that quietly starts to loosen the ceiling faster than anything else. It's the way you talk to yourself. Not just positive thinking and not just hype. I'm talking about something more precise. The language of identity. Most people say things like, I'm not good at this. I could never do that. That's just not me. And without realizing it, those sentences become structure. They reinforce the ceiling. But when people start breaking through it, something subtle changes. They stop describing who they are and start describing who they are becoming. I'm not good at this becomes, I'm still learning how to do this. I could never do that becomes, I haven't built that skill just yet. That's not me becomes, that's not me yet. That one word, yet, it quietly opens space in your identity. It turns the fixed ceiling into a movable one. Think about sports events where nowadays they're building ceilings that move back and forth, whether that's because it's raining or snowing or it's too hot, but it's a movable ceiling. It's similar here. And here's the deeper layer. Every time you speak, act, or decide from a higher version of yourself, you are casting a vote. We talked about this in an earlier episode. Not for who you've been, but for who you're becoming. And over time, those votes stack until one day, the identity you were trying on becomes the identity you live from. But none of this works if it stays theoretical. So let's make it real. Let's go ahead and do your next challenge. For the next 24 hours, I want you to catch yourself every time you use limiting identity language, any I can't, or any that's not me, or any people like me don't, ... And instead of judging it, just rewrite it in real time and add one word, yet. Then notice what changes in how you feel, even slightly. Because this is where the ceiling starts to loosen or crack, not all at once, but sentence by sentence. And once you start hearing yourself differently, you start becoming someone different. All right? So now let's go one layer deeper, because if identity is something you can actively shape, then there's still one question left hanging in the air. What happens when you start outgrowing the people and environments that reinforce your old ceiling? Let's talk about that next. Okay, this is where things start getting exciting, talking about life above the ceiling. All right, now we get to the part most people actually feel before they understand it. Life above the ceiling. Because once you start loosening that identity ceiling, something starts to change in how you move through the world. Not overnight, and not dramatically at first, but definitely noticeable, or subtly. You start walking into rooms a little differently. You stop shrinking before even speaking. You pause less before saying what you actually think. And here's the weird part. You don't feel super confident. You feel aligned. Life above the ceiling doesn't always feel loud, but it feels clear. Like you're no longer negotiating with yourself before every decision. You stop asking, am I allowed to do this? And start asking, does this match who I'm becoming? And your standards start shifting without you forcing them. What you tolerate changes. What you walk away from changes. What you go after changes. Not because you became someone else, but because you stopped living underneath an old definition of yourself. And people around you will notice before you do. They'll start saying things like, you seem different, or you're moving differently lately, or you've changed. And you might not even know basically how to explain it. But internally, something simple has happened. You stopped treating your ceiling like it was real. Now, here's the truth most people miss. Life above the ceiling isn't a destination. It's a frequency. It's a way of operating when you're no longer deciding from limitation. You're making them from identity expansion. And once you taste that, even just a little bit, you don't go back to fully believing the old limits. But there's still one layer, and it's a final layer to this entire thing. Because once you start living above that ceiling, you realize something almost no one tells you. That ceiling doesn't just disappear in your life. It starts disappearing in your environment too. The people around you, the expectations around you, the entire structure you used to fit inside, it all starts to shift. And that leads us into the final piece, the closing. Let's land this. All right, let's land this airplane. If you've been with me through this whole conversation, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not walking away from this the same way you came in. Because once you start seeing the idea of an identity ceiling, something does shift. Not because you've changed overnight, but because now you're aware. And awareness changes direction. So here's what I want you to take with you. Life is not asking you to suddenly become someone else. It's inviting you to step more fully into who you've been or already becoming, working towards your goals. One decision at a time, one conversation at a time, one moment where you choose not to shrink, but to press up against that ceiling and bust right through it. And that might be enough for today. Not fixing everything, not proving anything, just moving forward a little more aligned than before. That's how ceilings are broken. Not with force, but with consistency. So take that with you into your work, into your relationships, into whatever challenge is sitting in front of you right now, and meet it with that quiet, steady mindset of challenge accepted. And if you're still here with me, thank you so much for being a part of this. And if this episode spoke to you, share it with someone who needs it. Like it, subscribe, and stay connected because we're just getting started with these conversations. I'll see you on the other side. Until then, keep moving, keep building, keep showing up, and bust that ceiling wide open.